You'd put in your CRM, but then you go, okay, well, I'm looking at this process. Of this process, this is the biggest pain point. Can we automate that piece?
Hi, I'm Khyati Pal, and this is all about CRM. On this episode, we're going to be focusing on recruitment sales, the difference between an ATS and a CRM, data, AI, and automation. From email campaigns to SEO, my favorite topic, all things CRM. We've got Jamie Hart with us, David Connolly, Neil Curry, Stuart Johnson, Mike Watman. Welcome, Christy.
Would I spend £50 to go to this conversation?
No.
No. And until the answer is yes, then change them.
Exactly.
I know marketing isn't able to be measured. I was like, excuse me? Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably one of the most measurable.
Someone described to me once that recruiters spend their place in two zones, the finding zone and the filling zone.
Yes.
And the trick is to spend more time, as much time as possible in the filling zone, because that's where the money is.
3 pieces of advice you would give to anyone starting their journey, currently shopping for, let's just say, maybe even a new CRM.
To find out.
Today on All About CRM, we are all about data, my favorite topic, because God, do I love data. And today we've got Jamie Hart with us.
Lovely to
Welcome,
be here.
Jamie.
Thank you.
You have led some large-scale digital transformation projects, and you have been involved in, I'm sure, countless data migrations, especially when it comes to CRMs.
Absolutely.
What is good, top-notch, good quality data, and why is it important?
Why is it important?
Why?
Fundamentally, the CRM won't work without the good data. So people always talk about the people, the process, the technology, but actually underlying that, you need the data. And that needs to be in good nick. It needs to be in the right place at the right time. If you're doing a big migration or transformation, if the users switch on the Monday morning and it's not where they think it's going to be, they get very upset and frustrated. And if you lose that trust in the system straight away, it takes a long time to get it back.
I know. What are some of the common mistakes, do you think, that it's almost like universal? Like it's almost like every organization tends to make, because I know that there are. Yeah. That makes and also like often it's their second time at it or even third, and yet those mistakes are almost always made. You tell me, because I've got my own, but let's just look at 3 mistakes that are almost always consistent. And like, why? Why are they? I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well.
So I'll probably pick on 2 things. One is they always think about the data migration element last. So they're always fixated on the functionality, always maybe about the change, etc. But always fixated on what does the functionality do, what does the system do for them, without worrying about the data. So then the data, suddenly somebody at the end goes, oh, but we need to move the data from the old system to the new system. By which time you're already up against it, time-wise. And then people realize there's a whole load of decisions to be made. And it doesn't drop from one system to the other, because you've probably got a whole data model that's completely different. And you've got to hold people's hand through the decisions they need to make, right down to pick lists. Do they want the same options when choosing for a candidate, and the options how to code it or classify that candidate? So you really got to hold their hand and work their way through it. But the problem is people always think, oh, data migration won't take that long, or it'll just take overnight.
Famous last words.
Absolutely. And to be fair, the amount of time it actually takes once you've got it all lined up to migrate the data, you're talking probably days and weeks once it's all lined up. However, getting all the decisions and getting it all mapped correctly, that's months sometimes. And that can take ages to get the right decision makers, which data is getting moved, why it's being moved, where it should be in the new system. That takes a long, long time. So it's more around the timing and getting it considered up front are the most common mistakes.
That's true. What, talking about decision makers, there are people making decisions about data that have no business making decisions about the data. How do you navigate that and manage that? Because obviously with business leaders or project managers that have a good understanding of what's going on and what's required, they will obviously have a more objective and a more structured view to it. Whereas there are people who might be involved in the project in a consulting capacity, just because they are part of one of the business departments. How do you navigate that? Because I feel like when someone's part of a project team, and that's fine, everyone has an opinion and everyone has a say, that's great. But not every decision has to be made by consensus.
Probably 2 things. One is if you call out the decision and you lay out what the implications are clearly, then people understand the level that the decision needs to be made at. Whereas it's all very easy to come up to somebody and go, what do you think, A or B? You'll get an opinion.
Yes.
But A or B, but if you choose A, that means this, this, and this, or B means you'll have issues with this, this, and this. Suddenly that'll get escalated up to the position where the decision gets made. So that's one big element. The other element is then finding the right people and educating them early doors. And we're quite strong on that, which is getting the people that can make decisions and will stand by those decisions. So there's lots of people who will make a decision, but standing by it's a different thing. So finding them and educating them and understanding, taking them on the journey, working through with them the implications of what they're doing, that seems to make it a lot easier. But if you just take the first decision, then no, anybody will say the easiest thing that comes up just to get it through.
Yeah, I think there's education's definitely a thing. And I think it's just, it's critical thinking as well. Sometimes you're involved in your own department and, a lot of businesses still tend to operate with silos, with very little communication and dependencies that you can see on a daily basis. The decision that will be made by them is going to be so in favor of what works for them and their department and their objectives and whatever their KPIs are and not necessarily for the business itself. And I think that tends to be an issue because everyone has a bias. Everyone representing a department, whilst they're experts at what they do, amazing at what they do, they are still biased and pro their department. And CRMs unite businesses, unite business operations for the customer, or should be doing that, by disintegrating silos and connecting the information and acting almost as a central source of structured data, whereby you can see majority of the information relating to your business activities. Do you find that businesses approach it like that? Or do you find that businesses approach a CRM project, especially when it comes to data migration, very much from a sales first?
It definitely starts with sales first, without a doubt. That's normally the biggest driver. Somebody on the sales guys, we need a better system, etc. from there. But then normally the people making the decisions about which one or how it's going to be implemented then normally comes to the finance and the IT. So I think probably going back to your earlier point, it's more about who's authorized to make the decision and is somebody given that authority. Because unless you want to create a consensus or competing departments, then somebody needs to be called out who is driving the project. So lots of technologists will avoid being the head of the project because otherwise they'll always get the blame. So if it is a sales guy and it is the business making that decision, then they need to stand somebody up to make that decision. What they can't say is we want the system, but we're not going to be involved in its design, in what data is being moved in. So it's about calling them out who's going to make the decisions. So if the sales want to be front and center, they need to put somebody up that can be front and center.
That actually brings me to my, just a thought, because this is another thing, CRM implementations, migrations, but not just the actual system implementation, the thought behind the design, even the project management of it, and getting everyone involved, or at least the super users and department heads involved in giving their decisions. It tends to be somehow an IT department responsibility. I find that bizarre because, no matter how amazing you are as an IT director, IT leader, it's important to you is probably system security, the storage space, what impact does it have on your business network, cost associated with it. You are not necessarily going to be sitting there in meetings debating the right flow of sales activity, whether or not it matters to marketing, what's nice to have, what's must have. And also, I am sure you're frustrated by people and their problems relating to, IT.
Absolutely.
Why do businesses continue to have their IT departments lead CRM projects? What are the pros and cons? Because, of course, not all of it's bad. And have you seen an IT-led project of a CRM whereby it was successful in adoption?
It definitely can be successful. I don't think an IT-led project would preclude it from being successful. It's more about how they can then engage. And typically, your average IT person or even your really good ones are going to struggle to really understand the sales side of the business. So I think it's a case of the sales team is when you're starting the project, calling out who's going to be making decisions, but also who's going to own the system. And that's the stuff. So if it's a case, and maintaining a system is not ownership of a system.
No.
So if you're asking the question, who's going to own the system? What is the purpose of the system? What are you trying to get out of the system? And who owns the data? then normally you start getting different answers. So if it's a case of, well, who's responsible for the security? Well, the security is going to be the technology. If who's responsible for maintaining the contract for the new system, that'll be the technology. Who's responsible for the data? Who's responsible for making sure the reporting works? Who's responsible for looking at the KPIs? Who's going to be using the system on the day-to-day basis? And then you get answers that are different, that then you can then start going, well, if sales guys, you're the front end of the business, if you're involved and you want to own it, then you need to get involved in the project. And that seems to change the discussion a little bit.
Yeah, because it's more ownership then?
I think so, definitely more ownership. But I think most companies kind of realize that they need to put somebody up from the front end of the business. And if they don't, there's too many examples. I tend to think in the small and medium-sized organizations, they're like, oh, well, we're not, that's not our focus. We need to do this. Somebody else is going to be a specialist at it. But actually, the specialist people on their data and the specialist people on the CRM are the guys that use it day in, day out.
End users, exactly. And probably will use that information to make business decisions, isn't it?
Absolutely. But leaders are also allowed to disengage from the system. And where the leaders disengage from the system, they're then not involved with putting in the new one.
No.
So I think it's about engaging the leaders with the system as well.
Absolutely. It's because that then drives everything, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Adoption, the culture around it, accountability around data.
Absolutely, yeah.
Coming to leaders, again, I have been part of conversations and, have experienced it myself. There is this weird connection, this like love for dead old data that business owners just like, oh my God, I cannot get rid of 10-year-old data. No, I don't know what use I'm going to get out of it. No, I don't know if it's clean or not, but I cannot. It's like this weird fear. Do you see that? Yeah. And like, how do you go about it in terms of like, not just challenging them? Because of course, especially if you're in this region, you can perhaps use, the threat of GDPR. Yeah. But it's not just, it shouldn't have to be just threat. Like you want them to think about it as something that adds value, obviously data, but the expense. So it's almost like thinking about it more around like, is there a business case? What are the pros and cons? Because storage, if you are housing unnecessary data 10 years old, that's of no value. There's a storage cost as well. How do you work with leaders and how do you educate them on quality data and data practices and move away from volume to quality?
Absolutely. So I think probably the first one is to call out what is the actual cost of a placement.
Yeah.
And most of the leaders will treat all placements equally and the cost is just divided across the cost of the business. And it's not. Some placements are very quick and easy because the candidate's there, they can move quickly, whereas other ones have been going on for 12, 18 months while the consultant's been there scratching around trying to find the candidate. So what is the cost of acquisition of a candidate and what's the cost of making that placement? And when you start breaking that down, people start to realize. But you can also then just do time and engagement analytics. So how many placements are made of data candidates that arrived 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago? And you'll see it just drops off hugely. The other one I think that will make life a little bit easier, though, is that moving forward, I think there's many more opportunities for automation where you can handle a bigger database these days.
Yeah.
So I think if you went back 5 years ago, it was all about cutting the database, get it down in size. But actually, companies, if they engage the right CRM, can engage with a bigger audience and stay engaged and keep that data up to date a lot easier than they could 5 years ago and definitely 10 years ago. So I think that debate changes a little bit.
Yeah.
But primarily with the leaders, their starting point is, there might be a candidate on the database. What is the price, the cost of having that candidate on the database? From a storage perspective, from a risk perspective. And that's a huge thing because then when you're trying to do things with your database, you get stuck. You can't actually contact those candidates because they should never be there in the first place.
Exactly.
So the marketing teams get caught up.
Annoyed, yeah.
So again, it's about explaining what are the implications of that decision. So by calling out, if you keep 10 years worth of data, here are your risks. If you keep 7 years, here's your reduced risk.
Yeah.
And calling out like that across spectrum, getting the data, the DPO involved, the technology guys, the finance guys who'll be paying the fine, getting enough people involved, I think people then start to understand.
What is good practice? Because obviously there's GDPR practice, which is like 3 years. But what do you think is good practice, in your opinion? Like, again, the cost of a placement, the cost of storage, but also in order to move forward with any kind of automations and AI features and capability, what would be good practice in terms of the quantity? Let's just look at it from in years, so 2 years, 3 years.
I think you need to not treat the data as all equal. Okay. So if you're talking about an engaged audience, then you're probably talking 2 to 3 years that your consultants can maintain. Past that, then you need an automated process. And your automated could go back 3, 4, 5 years. But by engaging with them, you're immediately bringing that into the 1 to 3 year bracket.
Yeah.
So I think it's about breaking the data down into different chunks and grading it, which is the whole point of the CRM, is to be able to segment the data into, these are the ones we're going to call and stay in touch with. These are the ones the consultants might do their updating evenings or their general updating with. But no, here we've now got these automated tools through the marketing side, and we can stay in touch and they can update their own data, update their salaries or their positions, their addresses, etc. And that can all be done automated. So then you're looking at a different period from maybe further back in terms of data, 3 to 5 years or 3 to 7 years, but with the idea that that gets moved into the 1 to 3 year bracket. And if it doesn't, then it drops out because those people aren't engaging with you. Exactly.
Yeah. So just like re-qualify that data by sort of activity, isn't
Absolutely,
it? By triggering some kind of activity.
Yeah, we call it engagement. So there's time, but there's also what is the engagement with that.
Yeah.
Throwing an email at somebody is not engagement. I
sent them an email.
Exactly. Are they responding?
Yeah.
Are they engaging? Do they want to be part of your network? Well, in which case, engage with them and build them in and bring them into that 1 to 3 years. And then you're in a better place.
There has to be a certain architecture, right, of data and processes in order for the automations to result in something that is of value, and then eventually for you to have, your AI assisting you to make any kind of business intelligence related decisions. That data architecture, how do you guide when you are migrating from one CRM to another, or you're sort of consulting on data strategy? How do you guide leaders, but also project managers that may not be as data literate? And what would you suggest they do in like layman's terms? Like, thinking about data architecture not from like a data scientist point of view, but as a business leader, department owner point of view.
So probably the main one is the process they'll go through in terms of building a CRM will be, what are your processes? Right, what's the functionality that supports those processes? And then the bit that gets missed, what data is required to support those processes? So if you walk that data through with the processes, you'll find your gaps, because you'll be saying, oh, well, when the candidate comes in to register, does their initial, we want X, Y, Z bits of data. Well, sometimes it's not available at that point.
Yeah, and it's also not important. Like,
absolutely, it's not relevant at that point. So if you create bottlenecks of when you need data, either that or you go at the point of placement, now you need all this other stuff that could have been collected earlier. So what you need to do is work through the processes. When do we need the data? Why do we need the data? And you collect it at the right time through the process. You smooth that out. So then you can then go, okay, that bit we can automate. That bit we can automate, rather than going, oh, can we automate the whole process? Which is never going to happen.
But also it's not going to result in the right experience, the complete automation. No.
Absolutely. It's never going to happen. So it's chunking it down and working with the data as you work through each of the processes. But then that's an ongoing process as well, because you'd have put in your CRM and hopefully you won't have picked every single app that's available to tap onto the CRM.
Won't you?
Yeah. But then you go, okay, well, I'm looking at this process. Of this process, this is the biggest pain point. Can we automate that piece, or how can we make that bit quicker? That's how you make the process quicker. It's not about making the whole process, because you need to chunk it down into component parts. And that's where aligning the data with the process makes the difference.
So important.
So it's walking them through that journey, because if they don't go through that journey, you get to the back end and then everybody's there going, but I haven't got anything. I haven't got this bit of data. I haven't got that other data. Placement doesn't go through. Bottleneck at month end. Everyone goes crazy. Everyone's screaming at finance, and finance starts screaming at technology.
Yeah. Everyone's just basically screaming. It's like, it's your fault.
Absolutely.
So from a business operations perspective, data is going to just become, it's already very, very important, but it's going to become even more so the foundations, the good proprietary data, right? What kind of conversations are you having at the moment in relation to both automation and AI? Because I know, at least in my world of both conversations and like written content, there's so much around AI can do this, AI can do this. But then when you really look into it, there's not real business value. It sounds like great and gimmicky. And that's great. I'm glad that AI can, save me time on generating memes, but that's not really adding any business value. Unless obviously you work in generating memes. What kind of conversations are you having? What are businesses wanting to achieve with AI, with automation? Are they thinking about it in a more constructive way and maybe sensible way where they're like maybe wanting to start small, do some pilot programs? Or is there more of an appetite to just buy something and let it act as a solution, even though it won't be?
Well, I think I'll probably agree with you. Lots of them will buy it and it'll be called AI, but it's not AI anyway. So that's the hardest thing because everything gets labeled as AI.
Yes.
But I think what the process they go through, if you're talking about specifically recruitment areas, the sales guys, the recruiters like, oh yeah, AI can do this, AI can do that. I think realistically, the leaders these days should know that it doesn't do everything.
Yes.
And the technology guys definitely know they don't. And finance have been through this already, so they know it doesn't. So they know it doesn't really do it, but it's about, as you mentioned, identifying the correct use cases. And if they go through that process, so once you ignore the noise around, oh, AI is going to create this magic elixir of matching, which is what the internet was meant to do 20 years ago, and it's just not going to happen. And there's so many use cases to prove that that's not going to happen. Then you're actually looking at process use cases.
Yeah.
So does a human need to touch an invoice? Does a human need to update the system automatically? Can the computer do that? Contact them via email, automated through the triggers, collect the information, put it into the CRM. That's all distinctly possible. So it's about identifying what are you trying to get out of it and what is the efficiency or process gain you want.
Yes.
And if you work through those, you can make some big successes. The reality though is they won't be sexy successes.
No.
They'll be bottom line efficiencies, making this a little bit quicker, this a little bit smoother. And once you solve that, the recruiters will be like, yeah, but I also want this solved and I also want that solved because they never happen. So that's what you're working with. So it's not a case of this magic silver bullet.
Yeah.
It never has been, but people will always talk in those terms. Oh, this is a game changer. That's a game changer. It's never a game changer. It's small incremental improvements.
Yeah, because improvement, bottom line, is sexy to me. Because I'm like, of
That's
course.
cool. Yeah.
But then again, that improvement as a business leader should be important to you, isn't it? Like there's vanity revenue and then there's actual revenue, which is your bottom line.
Yeah.
Do you find business leaders, are they actually like genuinely curious and wanting to educate themselves and their teams? Because there is the data skill set, but then there's also the skill set of analyzing business use case and then sourcing the tools for it. In all of let's just look at your last 10 projects, for example, and look at how you've worked with data. What's the approach there and what's the sentiment? I think sentiment's probably the right word because I'm curious to know what is happening on the ground.
Yeah. So I think primarily the sentiment, that's more where we're engaged. The sentiment is we need to get on the first journey and we need to get on a platform that can move us forward. And you've still got a lot of organizations that are still on very old databases and you can't build things on top of them and it's very frustrating and people are stuck in that. So the initial stage, and I think the leaders switch on that the first step is the hardest, but it's a big old mountain to get up in the first instance. And that's about just getting yourself organized and getting onto your first platform, whatever that might be. And once you're there, then you can start accelerating. So I think most of our experience is that front end. And I think people realize that until you get onto that front end, all you're doing is bolting on point solutions.
Yes.
And the industry, let's be honest, is just scarily addicted to point solutions. And you just see companies, we've got this to do that and this to do that. And it's like, what's the point? All you're doing is just building up that complexity. So I think it's more a case of the good leaders are the ones that see it as a longer journey, for want of a much better word. But it's different mountains and you need to work your way towards them. And the AI and the automation comes after you've got onto the platform, after you've worked through things, because everyone's there terrified of a go live. Most of the real problems with the CRM are found out about 4 to 5 weeks after the go live.
Oh, God,
and everyone's terrified in the 3-4 weeks. Oh, what about this? What about this? And you sit there going, trust me, that is not going to be the most important issue after go live. What is going to be? We don't know yet. We're going to find out that somebody's mapped a process wrong. So there's some data missing or something like that. So that's what you need to go through. And once you get that point, you start seeing what the other issues that you need to solve to be able to get the AI and the automation. So for example, a big one that you'll see, I know Salesforce go on about it, the Dreamforce and the Agent Force that they're going on about.
Data
big
Cloud
spell,
and Agent Force.
Well, that's other things. If you're not using the same metadata, so as in the field labels across all your different systems, your finance, your marketing, and your sales and your recruiters, and they're not using the same word for function, discipline, sector, management accountant, business controller, business analyst, the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. No, there's nothing, no outcome. You're not going to get it.
So it's about getting the fundamentals, the data management. Are we using the same data dictionary across all the same platforms and the same systems? Which again is not sexy, but if you don't have that, you're never getting to your AI, you're never getting to those automations because it's not all called the same thing. So that's where I think the real bit with the data management is bringing in all the different silos and making people understand that the silos will get broken by the new system and a whole new world is developed, and you need to work your way through that because it doesn't happen overnight by any means.
No. Typically, let's look at, maybe someone who's running like a medium-sized organization. Let's look at like maybe 90, 100 people. And they are wanting to, let's just say, start from not perhaps scratch, because no one's starting from scratch, but in a way starting from the very, very beginning. They have an old database and an old style CRM and they're moving to a new one. What advice would you give them, not just in terms of like planning for it, but the duration? Because more often than not, people don't understand the time required from switching from one to another. And it's not just data migration. It's the adoption, it's the design of it, it's the testing, the fact that most people don't test it. Really surprises me. And then moving to implementation, the training, the adoption, and then also going back to, because you will tweak it after 6 to 8 weeks, you will tweak it. What advice would you give and what would you ask them to be mindful of?
I'd probably be a little bit extreme in the sense that if you go in with a view that it's a project and there's a start and an end to it, you failed. There is no end.
There is no end.
And so what you need to do is set yourself up so it's actually, again, for want of a less cheesy phrase, continual improvement. But if you're not geared up to be constantly working and refining the processes, improving it, you won't get the real gains.
No.
So you're never going to crack it on day one, and you're not going to crack it on day 350, and you still won't be there day 750. But so you've got to set it up so that people are always looking at it and refining and improving it. Now, the new platforms that people are moving on to, refining and improving it is relatively straightforward compared to how the old systems and the old platforms were. That will make life a lot easier for people, but you've got to build the team to be able to do that. So if you think in project mode, as in we're starting the project and we go live on X and that's the end of it, you've missed the point. That's how I'd call it.
Yes. Do you not find, because, hearing you say, because I definitely believe that, I don't think that that's extreme, because it is all about incremental gains, because the initial bit is, somebody else said that you need to invest into going to the gym and your diet if you want a six-pack, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Absolutely.
Similarly, it's the first phase is business requirements, and then you move on to the phase of like designing and testing and building your, like data architecture. But it's post the implementation. I find that it's not just the fact that it's like, oh, we've gone live and therefore it's done. Because the project manager, their project was to deliver it, for you to go live. Who should then manage the ongoing optimization of it? Because that is it's such a big thing, isn't it? Because it's like, okay, I managed the project, I did it because whatever. And now I'm no longer responsible for it because it is a big ask. It's something that you are required to constantly analyze, but also engage with business leaders. You have to have some kind of like governance meeting. You need to make sure that changes are being implemented as and when required so that the adoption stays consistent. Because the moment the CRM does not meet your requirements, you drop.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Who should do it?
I think it's a case of taking the opportunities that are created by the project in the first instance. So you will have upskilled your SMEs. Hopefully you've got some leaders that are engaged and understand implications, but they need to be continually involved afterwards. So it remains their responsibility. They don't switch off. They might have been seconded in or told this is your main project. It's got to stay with them, or you can rotate them, but somebody from the front line of the business, it's still the owner of what's going on. So the ownership doesn't pass over at the end of the project or after go live. The ownership has to stay with the business. They have to keep owning their data. They have to keep owning the processes. Likewise, if you're asking the finance guys or the technology guys, they need to continue owning what they were doing. So if the technology guys may have been standing up some business analysts or data analysts, well, their whole world will have changed massively moving on to the new platform.
Yes.
And their level of engagement and understanding of their business will be 20-fold what it was before go live. So holding on to those people and using their newfound knowledge And maybe some people may go as far as having a whole RevOps team, but a team dedicated to making the front office more efficient is probably the way people are going to go. Now, small, medium-sized organizations may struggle with the cost of that, but if you do your calculations right, the role of 2 or 3 people can make 100 people distinctly more effective and efficient.
Absolutely.
As long as you've mapped your processes and you're tracking it, and then you analyze if they are making progress.
Yes.
If you're not analyzing it, you won't know. So you've got to keep measuring it.
So then coming to my final question, skill sets, because again, data, the foundation, the optimization, the map of the flow, and the constant analysis of it alongside your AI built model. So even if you've got something, the equivalent of a data cloud, it's working well, migrating, integrated with your sales cloud, and you've got all the information, even then you will need a team or people, depending on the scale of your operations, to query it, to ask more of it, to understand it from a business perspective rather than a department perspective. What kind of skill sets do you see becoming almost a requirement in recruitment agencies that might be, again, medium size? So I know like small, you wear many, many hats if you're in a small to medium business, but let's just look at medium upwards to enterprise. What kind of skill sets do you think will become almost the norm, even in a recruitment agency setting? To
answer it most straightforwardly, your typical business analyst, I think, will have the ability to ask questions and understand how that relates back to a process or functionality. I think there'll be a lot more role for that. And that person doesn't need to come from a technical background. No. It could come from a recruiter background or a sales background. So I think there'll be a lot more interchange between those sides of things. Data analysis in some kind of guise, be that on the reporting side or the analytics, that will play a bigger role. And again, that's about being able to ask the leaders the questions and refine that back into the functionality of what's delivered in the reports. But I think overall, the skill base is not necessarily to do with specific roles. It's those people that ask the questions, that are sufficiently curious and aren't left behind, just satisfied, we'll just make do with this. Or definitely getting rid of all the people that go, we found a workaround, we've solved the problem. Because if you keep finding the workarounds, you just build workarounds on workarounds. And I've seen some very senior people celebrate a workaround and then regret it, big star, 6 months later.
Everyone's working around then.
I think it's more removing some of what was celebrated, the workarounds before, and more celebrating the curious questions, being prepared to try and fail things. Yes. Some things won't work. Accept it. Yes. Let's try it. Let's try this KPI. Does it work? Does it not work? Analyze why it doesn't work, etc. But we try and overcomplicate it and do too many things. So people who keep it simple, ask questions and are curious, those are the skills you're looking for over and above somebody's background, because there's some recruiters that will make some phenomenal business analysts out there.
That's just
or data
how they're
analysts.
Wired, Yeah.
But equally, some business analysts would make some really good recruiters and they could learn the same off the side of things. So I think it's more the qualities rather than the specific technical skills that will set them apart.
I think it's also, just to add to that, I think it'll be a mindset thing as well, because, to your point about failing and being okay with failing, we extend that sentiment towards new hires, right? So we hire people and, they don't work out. Then unfortunately, some of them leave or are let go. But we take that risk. We go, okay, this person's going to come in and there's a risk involved, may or may not be good, sounds good. We make that decision off the back of 2 interviews, 3 interviews, depending. We do not somehow show the same grace to technology or like pilots when it comes to like experimentation. I think that needs to shift. It's almost like if you're showing that to people, you can also show that to technology, fail small, fail fast. And you will learn something out of it. So it's almost like curiosity around how it works, but also the desire, like a desire to educate yourself, learn about what's new, and create that culture of curiosity and extend that grace to both technology as well as people.
But what I tend to experience though, is that your average recruiter and your leader, you're competing against their consumer technology, which is 20, 30, 50 times better than your business-to-business technology. So for me, it's about managing their expectations. And the problem is I'd say 70% of people turn up to work expecting their B2B technology to work like their single use case app on their iPhone. And it's never going to do that. So it's about adjusting people's expectations about what they're going to get. And if you adjust their expectations, then people are a lot more realistic. and then you can move forward. But if they've got expectations that the system's going to do X, Y, Z for them, and you've been in enough conversations, you'll speak to recruiters and they think systems can do things for them. That's never going to happen.
No.
So once you have those conversations and once you educate the leaders and they're having those conversations, then it's a lot more realistic and you're going to travel a lot quicker. But for me, it's expectations. That's the bit that people need to adjust.
Yeah. I think the point is that, everyone, the fear mongering around like, AI is going to replace humans. Well, no, it's just going to hopefully help you do and enjoy your job
Absolutely.
more
and
reach your potential and free up some time. So
Absolutely.
I don't know, have a life.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's also an element which is too many of the old platforms weren't meeting table stakes.
That's true.
So if people aren't using the system properly, immediately your new starter comes in, they can't even see what's happening with a client or what's happened with a candidate previously. So they immediately get disengaged or on an uphill task straight away.
So true.
So once you get to a table stakes where actually people are using the system, it automates what the obvious should be. It creates the data when it needs to create it. And people can see why the process is in place and you're stopping people doing the workarounds. Once you get to that point, you'll get a much higher level of engagement. Then you can start accelerating pretty quickly.
Final question. I know it was last question, but I feel like I can ask one more. Because this is going to be short and sweet. 3 things you want leaders to start thinking about when it comes to their data in the next 12 months.
3 things. 1, stop rewarding other leaders who run businesses with bad data.
Yes.
It's the leader's responsibility. And if you keep rewarding them, they'll keep doing the same activities. And it happens day in, day out. So that's number 1. Number 2, concentrate on your basics. Is your metadata or your field labels the same across all your platforms? Worry about your basic quality. And there's so many things you can do around your quality, etc., just to make life easier. Your fundamental duplicate rules to make things nice and straightforward. And you can do that as an ongoing management side of things. And
that can be automated, actually. So
absolutely,
that's perfect.
Definitely. Without doubt, for me, the data works if you work backwards from what are the KPIs that we are actually worried about, and then work your way backwards and build your system to report on those KPIs. Because if you worry about afterwards, it's too late. But that whole process, defining what the KPI is, was it meetings booked or meetings attended? I've seen hours lost to that debate. No. It's just crazy. It's like, define what's important, get agreement across all your brands and all your regions, etc. And then once that's agreed, after that, it's relatively straightforward. But if you leave it to the end or 6 months afterwards, you're then fighting a massive uphill battle. So those are the 3 things that I'd focus on.
Those are pretty good. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for coming.
Absolute pleasure.
It's we are the data police. I'm going to call this the data police. But nice data police guiding you through your data journey. My last word is probably going to be, data can be overwhelming, but only if you don't invest in understanding it and understanding your business. Data can be amazing. So do not live in data denial. Celebrate data. Let data be your guide. Yeah. That's a good one. Let data be your destiny. Oh, that's very ta-ta-ta. But no, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.